Hello, everyone. I'm Niyati Parekh from New York University, and I will be presenting my results on longitudinal dimensions on alcohol consumption in relation to dietary intake in an aging American population. Alcohol is responsible for approximately 95,000 deaths per year and the seventh largest risk factor for death and disability in the US. It's associated with increasing liver disease trends, especially in women and young adults, and with multiple cancer sites, especially the bowel, breast, and upper GI tract. Dietary guidelines for Americans indicate that drinking in moderation up to 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men is allowable. American Heart Association has similar language, and the American Institute for Cancer Research recently updated their guidelines to state, do not consume alcohol due to convincing evidence for the association of cancer and alcohol. About 86% of Americans report consuming alcohol at some point in their lifetime, with 70% reporting drinking over the past year and 55% indicated that they drank over the past month. In studies that have investigated alcohol consumption with dietary intake, they have observed low diet quality. However, the few studies that exist were cross-sectional and unable to capture the influence of alcohol on diet over time. So a very large research gap that exists is the evaluation of longitudinal studies in relation to diet. Therefore, we evaluated dietary intake and alcohol drinking patterns across the adult lifespan using multidimensional measures of alcohol consumption. This includes quantity, drinking frequency, binge drinking, and beverage preference. We utilize data from the existing Framingham offspring cohort. The Framingham Heart Study cohort was established in 1948, and their second familial generation was in 1971, with approximately 5,000 adults with complete data on diet and alcohol. Clinical exams were conducted every 4 years, and we have data for 40 years on alcohol intake and 17 years on dietary data. We included adults 20 plus years with complete data for the relevant variables. We excluded pregnant women because of their alcohol behavior changes during pregnancy at a time of a particular exam, and those with missing or implausible dietary values. So the final analytic sample was approximately 3,300 individuals. Here is a list of the alcohol as well as dietary and demographic variables that were utilized in our analyses. I want to spend a minute on discussing the alcohol variable definitions, because in alcohol epidemiology, there is specific terminology that is used. Average volume is defined as the number of drinks per day, and this is used to categorize moderate drinkers, heavy drinkers, and light drinkers or abstainers. Up to 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks for men would make them moderate drinkers, and anything higher would be heavy drinkers. Drinking frequency is the number of drinking days per week, regardless of the number of drinks on a particular day. Binge drinking is the consumption of 4 or 5 drinks or more on a single drinking occasion for women and men respectively. Total alcohol is derived by multiplying the number of drinks per week with the amount of ethanol in a standard drink of beer, wine, or liquor, and a standard drink has 14 grams of ethanol. We generated descriptive characteristics to ascertain the population characteristics. We also computed mean intakes of servings of specific foods that were assessed by binge drinking status in non-drinkers versus moderate drinkers and heavy drinkers, and by sex. We computed P for trend across the exams, and all analyses were done in SAS. There were approximately 4,900 individuals at baseline with a mean age of 36 years and a BMI of 25. At exam 8, of course, there was attrition, and the mean age was about 67 years, and a mean BMI of 28, indicating that they were overweight. One thing to note is that the Framingham Heart Study population was generally had higher SES than the US population and consisted mainly of whites. At baseline, there were 37% non-smokers, which also increased with age. Let's discuss the results. Total alcohol decreased from exam 1 to 8 and almost halved from 3.7 ounces per week to 2.2 ounces per week. Frequency for all alcoholic drinks decreased over time. The number of beers and cocktails per week decreased from exams 1 to 8, but wine increased. And self-reported drinking was approximately 85% at baseline, 66% that were moderate, and 18% heavy, which also decreased over time. In terms of consumption of servings of specific food groups, we observed that binge drinkers tended to have slightly, diets were less healthful than as compared to non-binge drinkers. Sugary drink intake was reduced in both groups, but was significantly lower. The decreasing trend was more obvious in non-binge drinkers as compared to binge drinkers. Total fat consumption was lower in non-binge drinkers, and they also consumed more fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, while binge drinkers had higher intakes of red meat and total fat. We saw similar trends in non and moderate drinkers as compared to heavy drinkers, who also consumed more fruits, vegetables, and heavy drinkers consumed more red meat, similar to the binge drinkers in the previous slide. This study had some distinct strengths. There was a follow-up period of 40 years and 2 decades, 40 years for alcohol and about 2 decades for diet. And there were multiple questions on alcohol intake that enabled us to assess drinking patterns. The limitation was that the sample was not generalizable to the US, and this was because of their higher SES status. To conclude, total alcohol consumption decreased with age. Type of alcohol consumed changed with a shift away from beer and cocktails to higher use of wine. Heavy and binge drinkers decreased with age, and drinking was associated with generally less healthy diets. These results are comparable with diets that were observed to be less healthy on drinking versus non-drinking days for men and women in the nationally representative NHANES analyses. NHANES also evaluated the Healthy Eating Index score. The theoretical range is 1 to 100, and the higher score is associated with higher diet quality. And in this slide, we see that on the second row, the Healthy Eating Index scores were significantly lower as the number of drinks per day increased. I want to end by saying that our findings in this population indicate that alcohol drinking patterns are not stable over the life course and are differentially associated with drinking patterns. Therefore, it is important to capture the multiple dimensions of drinking from the methodologic point of view. This type of nuanced characterization of alcohol consumption is needed to better understand the role of alcohol in chronic disease etiology. And I want to end by saying that in the COVID-19 pandemic, that has left us with increased sales of alcohol and increased drinking severity, as well as alcohol-related problems, such analyses become even more important. I want to thank my co-authors for this paper that was published in the British Journal of Nutrition in September 2020, Dr. Yong Lin, who's a statistician, and postdoctoral and master's students, Melanie Chen and Drs. Philippa Yule and Noor Makaram. So in the first part of the talk, you saw how alcohol and dietary pattern are interrelated. And in this part of the talk, I'm going to talk about alcohol as a commercial determinant of health and introduce to you the concept of commercial determinants of health. So what are commercial determinants? They're factors that influence health which stem from the profit motive. Others have defined it as strategies and approaches used by the private sector to promote products and choices that are detrimental to health. These determinants have become particularly relevant globally as non-communicable diseases have emerged as a critical public health challenge.
About 45 million people died globally from non-communicable diseases in 2019 and accounted for 71% of all deaths. But by 2025, 85% of these deaths will be from non-communicable diseases. Commercial determinants represents a new framework of systematically studying determinants that emanate from the power of the corporate sector and have led to profit-driven diseases. Corporates influence governments, society, and consumers. And in the case of alcohol, corporates determine the availability, promotion, and pricing of these unhealthy beverages. Thus far, we have focused on modifiable behavioral risk factors generally in public health and in science, such as tobacco use and alcohol use and unhealthy diets and physical inactivity, and kind of looked at these separately. But the new commercial determinants of health concept promises a more holistic, integrated, and targeted approach. And this framework has been kind of proposed maybe 3 to 4 years ago, with most reports published on this topic in 2020. So am I saying that we're against industry? No, totally not. But I think industry has the power to determine what products and how they sell and how much they sponsor events to promote some of the products. Okay, so examples in my work of commercial determinants have mostly been industrial foods, ultra-processed foods, as well as alcohol, since I'm a public health nutrition researcher, and both these basically provide calories and are part of a diet pattern. This is what I primarily study. But other commercial determinants include drugs, medication, vaccination, as we are seeing right now, tobacco, etc. So now I'm shifting focus to the associations between cancer and alcohol. And while most people are aware that alcohol in quotes is good for the heart, I think a lot of people are unaware of the black and white. Okay, every report talks about the risk of having increased cancers, and these are the specific sites that you can see on this slide in relation to alcohol. And alcohol has been studied in many ways: grams of alcohol, it could be the type of beverage, but hands down, the Millions Women study that was done in the UK, for example, and many other large cohort studies have found a strong association between these specific cancers and alcohol. And we might think it's the cancers that come in contact with alcohol directly, but breast cancer turns out to be one of the big ones. And the American Institute for Cancer Research and the World Cancer Research Funds have basically said in no uncertain terms that avoid alcohol as one of the protective factors for cancer. And this is taken directly from their expert panel report. They, from their analyses, have said that about a third of the most common cancers could be prevented through behavioral factors: diet, weight, physical activity, and alcohol definitely is one of the risk factors that they've identified. These are the guidelines for alcohol consumption for the dietary guidelines for Americans. I'm in the US, so these are the guidelines that I'm focusing on. And most of them are kind of soft. In the language is rather soft about the alcohol consumption. They're saying don't start drinking if you don't drink, because there are people under the notion that alcohol is good for the heart, wine is good for the heart. The American Heart Association says if you drink so, please do so in moderation. Everyone, and partly this is extremely political because of the alcohol industry that's behind it. They're not kind of coming right out and saying do not drink alcohol, except for the American Institute for Cancer Research, because the evidence is black and white. So this is just a pictorial representation of the cumulative diet risk factors, including alcohol, if you can see so, in this diagram. And the reason I'm harping on this so much is because there are certain dietary guidelines that actually have a glass of wine that is kind of put in the healthy diet pattern category, and they have a glass of wine in the picture of a healthy dietary guideline. And it is a confusing message for the lay people. So this is the cognitive dissonance because there's a lack of awareness of the facts regarding alcohol. And I think there needs to be a lot more education around this issue. At least the correct information needs to be put out there before people can decide. And there's also been a controversy about public health schools or programs. Are they allowed to serve alcohol or wine at events? Because alcohol is kind of associated with some of the celebrations and those types of events, and it's just very cultural. So where does the industry come in all of this, right? These are some of the big alcohol producers, and this is the network of their distribution, and they are present everywhere in terms of supporting large events, advertising. On the other hand, you don't have farmers and small local producers who have that much money to go propagate the healthy foods or healthy diets. I'm just trying to give a comparison. But you have the alcohol industry, the sugar industry, they're all over, and it kind of becomes a norm. It kind of becomes what's regular, what's acceptable in different societies. Okay, so this is, a lot of my research is around cancer, and this is the one thing that actually truly bothers me, where pink washing is using the color pink for cancer, for cancer awareness, breast cancer awareness month, etc., where they actually, all bars are selling more drinks and selling more pink drinks to basically raise awareness against breast cancer during breast cancer awareness month, if you will, when we know that breast cancer is directly, alcohol is a risk factor of breast cancer. So that's just one example. This is a slide that I have actually borrowed from the Wisconsin Alcohol Policy Project, and they are looking at alcohol policies in relation to availability, acceptability, affordability, and attractiveness. And they're kind of trying to tweak these policies and examine if they could reduce or normalize change the norm of alcohol consumption. Another example I'll tell you is that, there are a lot of highway pubs, right? And we don't want people to drink and drive, but that's where the money is made. So highway pubs are still open and a really big source of alcohol consumption. So could this policy be changed? So, and this group is actually looking at alcohol-related policies at all different levels to see if they can change some norms and perceptions. So I want to kind of bring this back also to the dynamics of commercial determinants. Health of consumers is really in relation to the environment, the food environment, the alcohol environment that they have. I live on a street that I can see right out of my window that has a lot of bars, that has a lot of bustling life, a lot of shops, and it's very easy access if anybody wants to go out. But if we didn't have this kind of density of alcohol shops, then maybe they would think twice. Or in today's day, I guess it's possible to even get it delivered straight to your home. But I think environment is really an important factor. Marketing, supply chain, lobbying, and corporate citizenship are factors that actually determine this cycle and interaction between environment, consumers, and overall health. So I kind of want to leave you with the conclusion of the commercial determinants, and it's very relevant for alcohol, and hope to shift the emphasis in research and policy from clinical management, from personal responsibility, from behavioral change, which kind of are limited. I think policy can have a much larger impact, and the alcohol policy folks are struggling with it because it's so political. The composite commercial determinants of health approach bridges research and policy silos, dividing different disease areas and rather focusing on types of interventions. So we're hoping that this holistic approach amplifies change through these integrated strategies, not only for alcohol, but for some of the other food environment factors that I talked about for all NCDs and including cancer. So I'll end with that, and thank you very much for having me.